All right, the government shutdown is now, I believe, in its 23rd day, and as you can see, my house isn't on fire. I'm assuming yours isn't either, unless you live in Detroit. But the fact is that we can't just assume that this crisis doesn't affect anybody because only 800,000 people are covered under this condition. Okay, so 800,000 people in a country of over 300 million would be less than 1%. In fact, it's about a third of 1% if you think about it. So, of every 100 people that you're going to meet, you're probably not going to meet anyone who's been furloughed by the government shutdown. But I actually happen to know somebody who works in aerospace who was furloughed by the government shutdown. We happen to have a NASA Space Center here in Cuyahoga County, and he's not doing too well because of other issues as well. Family problems, family health problems. So we can't just assume because a lot of us happen to be very, I would say, you know, bullish about the shutdown, supportive of the wall and everything. There is a cost in terms of people who are either inconvenienced or severely affected economically by short-term cash flow issues. Okay, it's not as if everybody is exactly in great financial shape. So we'll talk a little bit about how government pay scales do work. So I picked not just Ohio because it's my home state, but it happens to be Franklin County is where Columbus is. So that's one of the more, I would say, pedestrian areas of the country. Columbus is also often chosen as one of the places where, new restaurants are marketed. It's one of the most average parts of the country to live in. So we'll go and look at the GS1 Pay Scale. So it's the smallest pay scale of any federal worker. And let's go look at Franklin County. So the lowest paid government worker in Franklin County, which we don't know how many of those there are, but let's assume it's not that many because there has to be I would say most government jobs probably fall somewhere in the middle. Now, if you're a government worker and otherwise, feel free to send me maybe a link to some more statistics about it or a little bit more about the agency you work for. This is kind of just an exploratory talk about some of the effects of the government shutdown. So, a low grade step one GS1 worker would make $22,349 a year. And at the highest step, which means the highest seniority and performance, it would make a little less than 28,000. However, you can see as you go across the board here, in some of these middle grades, you have, for example, people who are making in the 50,000s. Okay, those are pretty nifty jobs. Now, what are the descriptions of some of these jobs? Let's look over here at GS8. So that pay scale, you can see you need a bachelor's degree, whereas for the GS1 pay scale, you don't require a high school diploma. Okay, so imagine that there are government jobs where you don't need a high school diploma. You make $9 to $11 an hour, and your monthly pay is about $1.5 to almost $2,000 an hour. In the DS8, you get bumped up. This isn't quite where I am. I make a little more per hour, but I don't have any government benefits. I don't have any health benefits, by the way. So these people are entitled to health benefits, and within the GS scale, promotions between grades, like a promotion from GS7 to GS8, come from advancing up the quote career ladder associated with the position or by moving to a job with a higher starting pay grade than your current GS grade. So let's say you get a job as some sort of clerk with the Department of Agriculture. If you want to get a higher pay grade, you might decide, well, I'm going to get a job with the Department of Transportation. Okay, people do that. Okay, so here's a few examples here. So the speech pathology and audiology area, where I actually have a relative who does that. Their starting pay grade is at GS6, and their maximum pay grade is at GS15. So GS15, if you think about it, in Columbus, Ohio, you could end up making $162,000 a year, potentially. That's definitely not the average. So I'm not trying to make it out here that these government workers are all making out like bandits, but apparently there are a few who are, making pretty good money. I happen to know somebody I think works for the like a government agency here. He makes some pretty decent money, but he's not rolling in the dough. Then there's agricultural commodity grading, which is I believe that's under the USDA. That's between 4 and 5 and GS4 and GS15. And you have supply program management. So a lot of these you can get up to GS15. For an information receptionist, so that's somebody sitting at a front desk, you could go up to a G9. So a G9 would get you up to $67,000, which isn't bad for the state of Ohio. Especially, I think the Columbus area is relatively affordable. So let's look at a different state. Why not pick a state that's a little more pricey? So we'll pick Connecticut. So the Connecticut General Pay Scale here, we'll look. I think this is New Haven area, which is where Yale College is. So you can see here, Yale University, sorry. The pay scale goes all the way up to 164,000. So that's even more. So essentially, these are jobs that you might not get the same flexibility in terms of pay pay as you would in the private sector. Okay, so maybe this was about $8,000 more than you would have made in Ohio. I think if you're living in Connecticut, you could be forgiven for saying, well, I'm making a little more money, but my costs are higher. So this is actually, it says here, the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania area. Okay, so that's I'd say the tri-state area and part of eastern Pennsylvania. So if you're at the very bottom of the scale, GS1, one of the lower steps, you're probably making only enough to maybe sustain yourself through college or something, or maybe live with your parents, something like that. That's the reality. So there are people who are possibly working, they're furloughed from their government jobs, and they're not making enough money to pay for some of their basic expenses, or they're not going to make enough money even in the best of times to be independent of their families. But that's the way it is in many of these jobs. Now you can go down the list here. Okay, it does work according to a lot of your qualifications. For example, the GS2, you do need a high school diploma. GS3, you're getting in. So a lot of these jobs, you don't even need much formal education. It only gets up to post-secondary education. You only need, after GS4, that's an associate's degree, which is a 2-year degree here in the U.S. for those of you that don't live here. And as you gradually climb the scale, you end up needing some of these more advanced degrees. So you need an associate's or a bachelor's at GS6, GS7. You already need, I'm assuming you're going to need a bachelor's degree, yes. And you're not making that much. So we're not talking about a great degree of, so here you need a bachelor's or master's degree to make GS9. And then GS10, you would already need a bachelor's degree. So you have to pay into this system. I don't think it's necessarily the best way to, I don't think it's the best way to build a career. Now, I happen to have somebody in my family. My dad is a government worker. He doesn't have, he has a high school degree, and that's about it. But he's been working, basically, it's a union job. Been working there for about 30 years. It's not federal anyway. It's a local county job. So in any case, I would say that we're talking about, federal employees. They often are people that they end up, comfortably living within the system for such a long time that they forget kind of the way that the job market works outside of it. I've known people who have worked within the DoD and within other departments of the government where, they're like, well, you show up, the stuff you do is kind of just bullshit paperwork and stuff, reading things. It's not necessarily the most, I would say, enlightening work, but people get by and people make enough money doing it. So eventually, I would say that some of these people they just give up on having any other ambitions. And let's be fair. Some people, I think, do try to do a good job when they're working for the federal government, but I think that in general, it's not that you're a horrible person if you work for the federal government. The problem is that the people that are bad that work for the federal government are very difficult to get rid of. During the IRS scandal, those of you that don't know, so there was the Lois Lerner. So they were trying very hard for a while to get Lois Lerner let go from the FBI, from the FBI, from the IRS, and it was a difficult battle, even though it became it was proven to be a fact that she was one of the leaders of this group of people that were targeting conservative groups, the Tea Party and other associated groups, for special auditing and other tax measures during the run up to the 2012 election. So it took a while until 2013. They couldn't get Lois Lerner to be kicked out of the IRS. Also, interesting thing, Lois Lerner has since leaving the IRS, she's refused to reveal the motivation and the directive that was used in order to justify the campaign of targeting against these conservative groups. So people like to talk about how these people are public servants and they work for the people and everything. In this case, they weren't working for the people. They were directly attacking certain types of people. The IRS is meant to essentially recover the tax revenue for the government that is levied by the law. I mean, that's the most sanitized opinion I can give on that. Of course, I have objections to the way the FBI does their work, as well as the mission of the IRS. Okay, so I think I just said FBI, but I meant to say I have issues with the way the IRS conducts its business, and I have issues with the IRS's mission in writ large. But you still have to, if you're working for the IRS, I think most people would agree that the obligation for the IRS is to collect tax revenues faithfully in order to fund the government and its projects. Okay, that's the best I can do. So, meanwhile, you have a pay and leave guidance from the Office of Personnel Management of the government. So they have here guidance for shutdown and furlough, sample letters for current creditors and mortgage companies. So these people, they're being told, well, I got to download the Office. Anyway, so the government has been through shutdowns before, so they do have certain guidelines that they give to employees. Now, does that work? I can't tell you myself because I've never been in a situation where I was told, well, we don't know when you can come back to work, so you have to figure out how to pay your bills in the meantime. The closest I can tell you was that last year, I did a video about this. I was pretty much let go from my job. It was expected, but it was, they just let me go and they gave me severance pay and that was it. and I'd already bought a house, the house I'm living in now, and I'm paying a mortgage, and basically I had to start completely budgeting from scratch. And for a while, I wasn't even on unemployment because I thought, well, this isn't going to last long. Eventually, I had to go on unemployment, which, by the way, it does not pay that much. And then, essentially, for a while, I was pretty much drifting without much to sustain my income. It was a pretty difficult time in terms of finances, and I had to, it's a good thing that I had budgeted until then very stringently. I've never been a big spender, so I was able to get through that period of unemployment without having to break the bank. And I think I'm actually close to where I was before now. But it's a really difficult position for people to be in. So if you're a government worker that's going through the government shutdown, I don't think that people should necessarily take pleasure in government employees. Even some of the government employees, I can understand, their jobs we don't necessarily value as much, but they still have to make those payments, and they have to go and bring home food for their families and whatever. So I think it's a consideration to keep in mind, even if you are like myself, a supporter of the wall. I'm a supporter of the shutdown too. I think a lot of these government agencies should be basically shuttered anyway. And some of these employees, I believe, would probably have a problem finding employment outside of the government because they've become conditioned to that type of employment, which isn't it's not the most efficient way to run an organization the way the government does. In fact, in many cases, these federal agencies not only do they exceed their budgets, but they have a mission every year to use as much of their budget as possible so they can ask for just as much, if not more, for the following year. It's well documented. In fact, I'll try to put a link here. Okay, let's use it or lose it. Government spending. So that was pretty easy. So this is the National Bureau for Economic Research. Federal agencies spend an average of 4.9 times more in the last week of their fiscal year than in a typical week during the rest of the year, according to expiring budgets lead to wasteful year-end spending. Evidence from federal procurement. So this is a little more of a critical analysis. Okay, probably from a biased source. Okay, so I'm not trying to make this out to be, just an objective opinion, but the fact is that's what happens. At the end of the year, these federal agencies may have some money left over, and they realize if we don't use that money, we're going to lose that funding for the next year, and we won't get to use it for whatever the hell we want. Now, so get now to one of the only juicy things in here. Apparently, a bunch of Democratic politicians flew down to Puerto Rico and saw the opening of Hamilton, which is a play, I guess. And they're down there during the government shutdown. I guess they chartered an aircraft down there, and this is the problem. Okay, this is a problem with the politics today. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. There is nobody who represents the working class voter or worker. Okay, I don't want to take sides here. I think it is a problem that Donald Trump is sort of screwing some of these federal workers. I don't think it's completely excusable. Okay, I wouldn't say my heart is completely broken by it, but I'm not going to call it meaningless. The fact is that those people, they have the right to make a living too. Okay. Unfortunately, I think that the way they're making a living is not really helping the rest of the country sometimes. But when you have the opposition party, the Democrats, what do they do during this government shutdown? They don't go visit these employees. They don't go working, the phones to raise money for them. Possibly, you can raise money to help these federal employees through telethons and all sorts of crap like that, or maybe a big GoFundMe or something. I don't know if there's some sort of legal problem that would encounter, but if you can't do any of those, okay, let's say you can't do any of those, all right, because I'm not sure that you can just raise money for federal employees. You do not go and charter an aircraft to Puerto Rico to see a Broadway play at luxury hotels. And that's really what I think is the problem, that you have two parties that don't actually look after the interests of the average person working in America, whether it's a government employee, whether it's a private sector employee, whether it's a self-employed person, whether it's the small business person, whether it's somebody who's there's a lot of handicapped workers out there. Okay, maybe some of those handicapped workers do work for the government. I don't know. So I hope that you guys have the same sense or something similar of what's going on with the shutdown. I do want the wall. I do want this issue to finally move forward. And I'm tired of this obstinance that's going on. But I can't tell you that my understanding of the plight of the federal workers means that I'm going to oppose shutting down the government for something that had to be done. And the approach of people who are opposing the shutdown isn't productive either. If you want to solve the problem, you have to be engaged. You can't just fuck around in the Caribbean for several days. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel. Also subscribe to my second channel, it's Razor Ray Super Special Cuts. Razor Ray Special Cuts. Mad Dodge Productions. I might share this video with him too. And also, please find me on CocoScope, BitChute, and all of the social media that is behind me here. And I'll talk to you guys later. Enjoy your Blue Monday.